again. Welcome to everyone. Welcome to Global Destinations Sustainability Movement Seminar. My name is Peter Lee from Managing Director of Goyang Convention Bureau. So many of them Korean. Is on the understanding of the speakers. I'm going to introduce myself in Korean. 안녕하세요. 저는 이상열입니다. 저는 현재 고양 컨벤션 뷰로의 단장을 맡고 있습니다. 오늘 좋은 그 지속 가능성에 대해서 좋은 식견과 그리고 다양한 지식을 얻고 논의를 할 수 있는 장이 되기를 바랍니다. Okay, sustainability is a really matter and then the global issue. Some climatologists insist that COVID-19 is also because of the climate change. Until now, MICE industry has generated a lot of carbon from the aviation trouble and garbage, including one-time disposal and food waste from the event on site. However, it is true our industry has less concerned about climate change and sustainability. Global Destination Sustainability Movement was initiated by Global Destination Sustainability Index, where more than 60 MICE cities in the global are joined for sustainable improvement in each city. Today's seminar is about city, and today's seminar is about destination, sustainability. So let me jump up to the first session. And before the session, I want to introduce the first speakers. First speaker is Guy Bigood. Guy Bigood right now he's initiated Global Destination Sustainability Index Program, and also he is right now is Managing Director of Global Destination Sustainability Index. More than 20 years, almost, he devoted to sustainability in the meeting industry. He has been delivering award-winning consulting service focused on the helping city, government, and corporation and association. And also, finally, in 2015, Guy launched the Global Destination Sustainability Index to accelerate the development and performance sustainable business, tourism, destination. Let me welcome Guy. Guy, welcome you. Go ahead.
Good morning, everyone. Well, good afternoon, actually, for you. It's an early morning for me in Barcelona. Glad to be with you all. Good. Great. So then I'll start, shall I? So let me share my screen. And then let's start with a little presentation. So bear with me one second. I'm going to try something a bit new and fancy in Zoom, a new feature. See if you like it. There we go. Okay. So you will see me in a second just pop up. Bear with me one second while this does this. But how are things? I hope you're having a wonderful afternoon. Now you should see me over here, and I'm quite dynamic, so you might see me jump around a little bit. I know I can't be up, down, round, left, but I'm going to start down here. Okay. Good. So I'm going to share a little bit today about what I call the regenerative revolution, which is a new paradigm for event management. So that's my presentation today. It's based on some research that I launched last week with IMEX, the trade show, and with Marriott. I'm going to ask my friends in the panel over here to help me. I talk very fast, and so I'm going to try and slow down. And if I talk too fast, Peter, Professor Jung, you have to send me a message and tell me to slow down, because I know that can be a challenge sometimes. So as Peter said, I work for the GDS movement. I started up this organization, and our purpose is to create really better, more resilient, sustainable, great places to visit, meet, and live in. So what we do is we work with DMOs, destinations all around the world, and cities all around the world to help them create new strategies, change their mindsets, skill sets, and really to kind of think of the future. So we work with about 65 cities around the world, a couple of cities in Korea, but a lot in Europe, the States, just starting now in South America, and Australia and Africa as well, and Australia, of course. And Pip will come and share a little bit of her journey as well, as both a client and now as part of the movement as well. So let's kind of start with this, you know, because our world has changed, hasn't it, really? I mean, I don't need to tell anyone in the audience how our world has changed. And so society is already reacting and transforming. You know, many of us are today working from home. Many of us have changed how we travel, how we live, how we play, how we socialize. We're imagining the future. We're revisiting our goals. We're reframing what life's about. We're reconnecting with friends because we're not traveling so much. We're connecting maybe with our community. And some of us are kind of regenerating ourselves. Nature's regenerating. So really interesting times, and it's kind of a time of what we call a paradigm shift, because everything we knew is being questioned and challenged. Every assumption is really being challenged. And through that, people, I think, are really connecting with nature, spending a lot of time in nature. And I think that's one of the reasons why people are really starting to think about climate change, what Peter mentioned. And in this survey of 30,000 people from around the world, 71% said climate change is as important as COVID. And pretty much all the surveys that we've done and we see externally are saying this, that, you know, there is a shift in perception, and people really get that climate change is important. Last year was a big year, I think, for the meetings and events movement in terms of sustainability. It was a real tipping point. And you can see that with the actions that some of you in Goyang were doing, in Seoul, the work that Peter was doing. And this was reinforced by the research that we did with Marriott International and IMEX, that last year we saw 97% of the 1,500 organizers around the world we organized were doing something around sustainability. The first time I did this, it was 5% survey. And then I think in 2008, it got to 11. So we've gone from 11% to 97% in 12 years. Bit slow, really. 95% of those professionals in January or in May thought it was important. It was 90% in January, and now we did it last week. It was 97%. So people get, this industry is getting that this is critical. But is that enough? And this is really what my whole point is. It's good, but is good enough? I don't think it is, because I think we have a wave now of COVID. We have a horrible wave of recession behind it, and debt that's going to hurt us a lot. Behind that, I think there's the waves of climate change and biodiversity collapse. So really quite scary and sinister message, I think, that's not always very empowering, but that's the reality. So our job, I think, is to work out how we flatten the curve. It's a word that we use a lot around the world at the moment around COVID. How do we flatten the curve? I think we have to flatten the curve with climate change and biodiversity. And so that's really what I think this is about. And so this requires us to rethink and reimagine the way we work, the way we organize events, the way we travel, the way we live. And it requires a shift, a mindset change. The past was this linear method of and a degenerative form. We just took things out, we used them, we threw them away, didn't think about it. The last 10, some of us maybe a bit longer, have been focused on sustainability, which is really focused about doing less bad. You know, let's recycle a bit, you know, let's reduce our emissions a bit. Well, now I think we have to go to a whole new level, which is really about regenerative thinking. It's about how do we recover and rejuvenate our planet, our economy, our communities? How do we heal them? Not just make them sustainable, because that's not good enough. Sustaining what's broken doesn't work anymore. And so it's a bit like this, this caterpillar, that becomes a butterfly. That's the process of transformation, or a process of regeneration. And so regeneration means this creating these conditions of life to continually renew itself, to transcend into new forms and to flourish, a bit like the butterfly. Okay. And a bit like the butterfly, where the butterfly or the caterpillar goes into the chrysalis, he goes into a space of quiet, of contemplation almost. He's in that caterpillar for months, right? And that's a bit like us at the moment with the kind of low in the events industry. We have a time to stop and think, a bit like the caterpillar, before we transform into the butterfly. The great stuff is that there's other industries doing this kind of work out there which we can learn from. The IT industry is doing some great thinking. Microsoft, they came out and said, we're going to be carbon negative by 2030. Sounds good. But not only that, by 2050, we're going to have a regenerative mindset that will remove all of our carbon emissions. We're going to plant so many trees, we're going to put in so many solar panels that we're going to actually eliminate any emissions that we've ever created. But not only of that, we're going to give $1 billion to create a climate innovation fund. So that's a real thinking around regeneration. Walmart, who is the world's largest supermarket chain, okay? They've come up with a similar thing. They want to be zero emissions by 2050, but they want to protect and restore 50 million acres of land and 1 million square miles of ocean. And they want to transform supply chains and food chains. So really some big thinking coming out. And so for me, it was like, what does that regenerative thinking look like in the meetings and events industry? So here is the image of this report we launched, the front page of the report we launched last week. And so really it's about, what does this revolution look like? And how do we really use events and the work we do in the visitors economy to regenerate lives, communities, and nature? And how could we create a zero carbon, circular, and inclusive industry where everyone benefits from success, not just a few at the top? And so a bit like this bee flying around and propagating pollen, how do we become that, even more than we do today to a certain degree? So let's kind of delve into that. I don't need to remind you that how extractive our economy is. We take, we make, we use, we dispose of things, Only 8.6% of everything we take out of the earth is recycled back into the economy. So our circularity of the planet is 8.6%. That's pretty bad, isn't it? When you really think that more than 92% of the stuff we just dispose of, and we're throwing it in the ground, we're burning it, or we're throwing it in the oceans. So that's not good. 30% of the food on the planet is wasted. That's crazy. That creates 6% of global emissions. You realize that's more than flying. And yet we slam flying, or people slam flying in the tourism events industry for its carbon emissions. People don't even talk really much about food, let alone just the plastic waste. That creates more carbon emissions than flying. So I think there needs to be a little balancing of the argument and a balancing of what we focus on, and not just one thing. So we need a new model, a new mindset, and that mindset's a circular mindset. It's driven and inspired by nature. We take an input, we make it, we use it, recycle it. We then remake it, we reuse it, we recycle it. A bit like a tree does when it's growing, right? It grows, it fertilizes the ground, it dies, it turns into compost, another tree pops up. There's a whole circularity. In nature, there is no waste. So how do we mimic that? And that means kind of looking at, I think, 3 areas here, of what I think are 3 key parts of a new operating model. So we have the biosphere, and that's an easy one to understand. We just talked about that, right? So it's like the tree, right? It grows, it breaks down, it composts, it regrows. And so we have to think about everything we use that is made out of natural components. So every time we organize an event and we use paper, we have to make sure that it is recycled and regenerated and used to either produce energy or regenerate soils. So we care for that natural cycle, or the biosphere cycle. On the other side, there's stuff we create, you know, so our stage sets that are made out of plastics and metals and things like that. So that's part of the technosphere. And so we have to think about how we reuse, repair, remake, recycle all of that stuff, the IT stuff in an event, the stage sets, the brand displays. How do we create processes to keep them in use and of value? And then lastly, there's us. We're the human sphere. So how do we, move myself out of the way over here, how do we firstly preserve and regenerate the biosphere, because we're guardians of that, okay? And then how do we maintain the value of the technosphere? And how do we do all of that while making sure that everyone benefits from this whole cycle? So this is a kind of a new operating model that we need to think about. And some of us are already doing this, but many of us are not. And if we are doing it, we're not doing it enough. But to get there requires one major thing. We have to really rethink our relationship with nature. In Korea, you have amazing nature. I think you are pioneers in rethinking your relationship with nature and recovering your forests. But not everyone thinks like that. And not everyone in the world is definitely as good as you are in Korea. Nature is our teacher. She spent 3.6 billion years on R&D and investigation. Look at this plant, and look how that inspired Gaudi to design a building. She's an amazing teacher. She teaches us about design, engineering, society, community. She really is a living, evolving, and innovative library of knowledge and solutions. And this plant here that catches flies is a great example, or catches the water. Nature is amazing. She reacts to change by adapting and not resisting. I think we can learn a lot from that right now. So just as this tree kind of gets on with things and starts to grow around this 10-point Angkor Wat, maybe we should just get on with working with COVID and try and find solutions than complain about COVID. And that's a harsh thing to say, but that's what nature would do. She would just kind of get on and evolve. Nature thrives on balance. And think of this relationship between these mushrooms and this tree in this photo. The mushrooms have a symbiotic relationship with the tree. They're living off the tree, and the tree benefits from the mushrooms. So nature is not to be conquered or opposed. We just need to learn from nature how to make design decisions. How do we really learn from all of this stuff that I'm showing? You know, just imagine this forest here. It had a fire, it was burnt down, a bit like the meetings and events or the tourism industry right now in many parts of the world. Our industry is on our knees, we're burnt down. But forests regenerate. They kind of need the fire often to unlock new seeds of innovation and change. So that's a little bit I think about us right now, and this amazing opportunity we have to regrow and to rethink our forest. And I think the meetings industry is a forest. And so let's not have it all lined up and linear. Let's create something a bit more different. But this again requires some change of thinking. The old way was linear in terms of our thinking. It was a linear systems thinking approach. Extractive, we're focused on efficiency. How do we do more and faster and with less? And then we just throw it away and start again. Growth was uncontrolled. If we want more life, right, we have to think of a living systems approach. So focus on quality and effectiveness, resilience, inclusivity, abundance, vitality, harmony. Okay. Often you sacrifice resilience by efficiency. So we have to balance things like that. And it's really important to remember, I'll move myself around here a second. I'll go up here for a change. In nature, there is no greed, there's no unemployment, there's no waste, there's no poverty. They've been designed out by nature. So how do we create a system in the events industry where we don't have any of that? And in society, because this is bigger. So I think there's some really interesting things we can take away. And just think we can learn so much from nature, right? Across the sea in Japan, when they were designing the Shinkansen, they had a problem with sound waves. The train went so fast it created sound waves. So the engineers looked to nature, and they looked at the kingfisher bird, and they looked at his beak, and they saw that when the kingfisher dived, it was very smooth. And so they copied that into the train system and got rid of the boom and the vibrations when the Shinkansen goes really fast. So we also can learn from nature. So that kind of drove me to really start to think about what does this mean for events. And I'm going to share with you now quickly a framework that we started to work on. It's really first steps. It's one of those things, it's going to evolve a lot in terms of what we do. But it's called Hanawa. And Hanawa is an ancient African word for kind of living in harmony with your environment. And we have a few principles and a framework here. So Hanawa is inspired by nature. It's restorative and regenerative by design. And the first 4 key principles here is that when we design events, we need to design out waste and pollution. From the first moment we're doing the strategy for the event, how can we start to think to design out waste and pollution? Carbon emissions is pollution. So if we design an event that is in the middle of where our people are going to fly to, we're going to have a less pollution, right? But is there a way to design out completely pollution, right? Is there a way for us to use 100% recyclable stands so there is no pollution? So that's the kind of thinking that we need to do. Then, this over here. How do we keep materials and products in use for longer? So again, how do we think through that? How do we design to include people and communities more? So how do we give back to the host community? How do we make sure that everyone is included in the event? 10% of event attendees have some type of accessibility challenge. They could either have physical disabilities, they could be pregnant, they could have cognitive or emotional or mental challenges. Do we design events for that? Just the simple thing of a pregnant lady. A lot of events have massive amounts of stairs that makes it really difficult for some people to get up to. Imagine the guy in the wheelchair. So, let's basic stuff, think about that. But then we can go to the next stage and start thinking about panels. Are they balanced? Do we have a gender balance? Do we have a sexual orientation balance? So things like that. Are we really including and designing for everyone? And then lastly, how do we regenerate natural systems? And so that's not just trees and forests, but that's people, because we are nature, we're natural systems. So those are the principles. Behind that, there are 8 steps, and these are the 8 steps, and I'm going to take you through those. And if we do this right, then we're proposing that your event will work better and will be more in harmony with your communities and will generate more long-term results. So let's go through that. So number 1 is about redefining your strategy. When you think of your event, are you a travel agent or are you a change agent? Are you just moving people to bring more people to Goyang or wherever you're doing your events? Or really, can you use your event to create long-term change? And I think Professor Jung is going to talk a little bit more about that in a moment. And I think Sustainable Development Goals are a fantastic framework for that, because they give you 17 areas where you can think about creating change. And so if you think and you move from linear to living systems thinking, that really give you some amazing thoughts around how do we design for diversity, design for circularity, design for regeneration. How do we improve the communities and the planet and the economy? So that's things. So that needs to start from the first moment you start planning your event. The second is about resources, and this is an amazingly complex slide, but it's an amazing slide. It comes from a music festival you can see on the right-hand side from Barcelona. And they decided to be the most circular dance festival in the world. This is kind of K-pop on turbo, this is. And so what they did, they went out and they studied everything that goes into their event. So you can see energy, water, drinks, all the infrastructure, the money, everything, the food. These are all the weights of all the materials. And then they looked at all what comes out, all the products. And then they could see all the stuff that's thrown away, all the stuff that's reused, all the stuff that's recycled. And it really allowed them to map out and understand their resources. We don't do that enough in events because we don't care. We just throw it away and we buy new stuff. If we actually measured and monitored this more, we could make better decisions. And that's what they've done here at this event. And they've become a very successful, very circular event because they know what they're using and they can change decisions to make it better. Number 3 is about your value chain. And so this is really about partnership. So how do you work in partnership? And I use this picture because it comes from IMEX. So IMEX produces these big trade shows, massive trade shows in Frankfurt and in Las Vegas. And they've really created this team of with their production company, their IT company, their consultancies, their marketing company, and it's a real teamwork around sustainability and regeneration. And this is an event we did to talk about the results that we were doing. And as you can see, everyone's dressed as a superhero because that's how IMEX thinks of their team, as superheroes. So fun, but this is a really type of thinking we need to have around collaboration. Next step is around your brand experience. We all do lots of brandings for our event. Okay, we build stuff up, we use it, we throw it away. That is typical for events. But how do we build stuff up in a different way? So this is Eco Booth. It's a company in London that makes stands from leftover stuff. This one is made from plastic. They took out the Thames River in London. So it's all recycled plastic. They make stuff from the insides of fridges that are thrown away, from old gas stations and light bulbs and things like that. They really repurpose waste. And then they design stuff to be reused multiple times. So how do you do that with your own work? And that's the challenge. And I think those 4 principles here can really help you. Food. In Korea, you love food. I love Korean food. So let's think about how we use and eat and throw away food. Yeah. So let's go back to that dance festival, DGTL. And so they produce a big event, thousands of food stands, feeding their dancers and their parties. And so now they buy the food from local farmers. They've got rid of meat to reduce their emissions, because they also think that's more a regenerative, better way of feeding people, a healthier way, a lower carbon way. They then get the visitors, the festival goers, involved in recycling and composting their food and making conscious decisions. They then compost the stuff and all the leftover plates and food, and they give that compost back to the farmers. Those urban farmers then regrow vegetables, which are then sold back to the festival, that are then used to make food again for the festival goers. So it's a cycle that happens over a year, obviously, but it's a cycle, it's a circular cycle. So how can we start to have that kind of cycle in the way we work? And I think that's about really thinking about food, we're buying fairly, making sure we buy locally, organic, sustainably. And then there's a social aspect to how we buy and consume food. Okay. Number 6, about rethinking mobility. I think one thing that what COVID has done right now has really made us rethink about mobility. Here we are online, virtual and hybrid meetings will be the norm in the future. We won't travel perhaps as much, I don't think. I think it allows us to make better decisions about how we travel and when we travel. I think we should be thinking about traveling less, but when we do travel, traveling for longer. So like when I came to Korea last, I came and I did 5 days of meetings, but then I stayed for 5 days and I cycled the length of your amazing country to explore it. I think that's the kind of thinking we need to be doing, slowing down a little bit to really enjoy where we go to and have real impact. I think trade shows have a real big role in this. So I think when we start to design events, we need to be focused on where we locate them, how we get people moving within the event, and ultimately making sure we make the right decisions. And then at the end of the event, we need to make sure that we're offsetting our emissions. So whether it's planting trees here in a local community, or what Korea does is you plant, the government plants lots of trees in Mongolia, and Goyang in particular is supporting that. So great initiatives, but it could be focusing on renewable energy, it could be composting, could be other things that you can invest in, but offsetting and compensating your emissions is very important. So last couple of points here quickly. Re-energizing, re-empowering your people. So this is an example from Croke Park, which is a football stadium in Ireland, in Dublin. And they've done a really great work at thinking of their local community, making sure they hire 75% of their staff from within 3 kilometers of the stadium, giving back to the schools and the communities, thinking about where they get their food from and investing in local farming to give them the food, to give them the grass they put on the football pitch. So it's an amazing regenerative attitude that has transformed the local community from being quite a rough part of town to live in to becoming a much better, safer, more prosperous area. So how do we do that? So you're in Goyang, well, some of you in Goyang today, how does Kintex and the hotels and all the work you do in Goyang and Seoul really make your place where you live in a better place to live in? And kind of the last point here is about reporting. Just as I talked about looking at your resource flows in point 2, at the end of the event, you need to understand what your impacts are: economic, social, and environmental. Oracle World has done an amazing job at this for 10 years. And so they know how well they're doing. And this is the amount of waste they produce. And you can see they started off bad, it got even worse, and they really have reduced their waste. And that's through composting, recycling, landfilling. So this allows them to manage, it allows them to communicate, it allows them to build credibility. And that's what we have to do when we disclose our impacts. And Pip's going to talk a lot more about kind of reporting and data and kind of systems thinking later. So let's kind of wrap this up now a little bit. So here's the wrap up. After the fire, the forest regenerates. We're in a fire right now. We will regenerate. But each of us has a role to play in that. So what's your role in building back better? Building back an events industry that's better, building back your business that's better, building back your company, your life that is better, because we each have a role to play. COVID gives us a once in a lifetime opportunity, I think. This is a transformative moment. And so we can really rethink about our future, really think about those sustainable development goals and what they mean to our business, to our community, to us individually. And I think too much of the time in the last few years has been around sustainability and really thinking about suffering and the world's going to be worse. Well, I think regenerative development asks us to imagine the world as more beautiful, events as more beautiful, better health, more harmony, more productive capacity, more happiness, more laughter. And I think that's a really exciting thing to think about. And when I'm laughing here as I put this picture up, because I just threw this picture up, which is from Yosemite, and I just moved myself up here. a few years ago, I climbed this cliff face. It's called El Capitan. And when you're on a cliff like that, it kind of makes you really think about life and what it's all about and nature. So I invite you also to go out in nature and really, really take the moment to use nature to make you think about what you have and what you could lose. So let's not forget, we are nature. That's what we're about, right? We are part of nature and a very important thing. So I invite you to download the report, imexexhibitions.com/regenerative revolution. You can see a link on our website, gds.earth. Thank you very much. It's a real pleasure to address you, and I'll be around for questions. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Guy. Thank you, Guy. It's a wonderful presentation. I don't forget I'm a nature. Okay, and also I'm quite impressed with the presentation, and that there is a change in the mice industry. So if I correct, in 2010s, to your presentation, only 65% of the meeting professionals considered the sustainability as an important factor. But right now is 95%, right? So almost every event professional consider sustainability as an important factor. It's good.
Yeah.
And also, you provide me some agenda and also homework. We Goyang City just published the sustainability strategy for the meeting industry, but you suggest another one is the Hanwha principle. You mean that you asked me about the monitoring our strategy to the Hanwha principle, right? But and also the whole meeting industry need to consider how to adapt the operating model of the circular and regenerative economy in the meeting industry. So we need to think about it. We need to keep focus on those things. Thank you very much, the Guy. And if I have more questions, I will let you know and in the later. But I had one question to you. In the COVID situation, it's like unlikely in the climate change one. It's a COVID causes massive increase of the one-time disposal products, right? Some tiny gloves and packing, some food. So what's your solution for them?
It's a really complex one, and I think in general around the world we've jumped back to use disposable plastics without any kind of scientific region and rationale. If you look at a lot of the studies coming out, putting gloves on is actually worse than using your hands and washing your hands. Plastic holds the virus longer than your skin does, right? We're saying use a bottle instead of using a glass. Actually, it can be safer to use a glass than to keep having a bottle and carrying it around and connecting things. So there's a lot of decisions that are really bad at the moment. And unfortunately, some of them are wrapped up into national guidelines. So there's two things. So one, as an industry, we have to campaign to have good national guidelines. Two, as individuals, we have to do our own research and challenge everything. And three, we have to start to think about innovating and creating better ways than we had before. It's not about jumping back to an old way. We have to have a new, better way of doing it. So let's think about that, and there could be simple things like the Sands group of casinos has come up with a new fantastic way of recycling masks and turning those into product fill for packaging. Okay, so that's what they're doing. I think there was a question here about building materials, right? Just as in COVID waste, a building material here can be recycled and reused. So if you're building, you're going to look, we should be investing in LEED principles for how we build hotels and houses and accommodation blocks. Likewise, in our meetings industry, we should be looking at principles and certifications to guide us to do things right. So I think there is a way forward. I think it's not difficult. There's some great, if you look on our website, there's some great examples of what you can do that's clean and green is the word I like to use.
Okay, thank you. If the participants from the venue, the most global expert of sustainability said the wearing gloves is not good. So recommend to wash their hand with a sanitizer. Yeah. Okay, let's jump up to the second session. The second session is about the sustainability of the UN SDGs in Korea. The presenter is Professor Yoon Young-hae. Yoon Young-hae is a professor of the Dongdeok Women's University, and also she's a vice chair of the Dongdeok Culture and Tourism Event Strategy Institute. And also, she is a task force member of Goyang City MICE sustainability strategy, and she conducted research about UN SDGs of the MICE in Gyeonggi province in Korea. Let's invite Professor Yoon. Professor Yoon?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay.
You can go ahead.
Yes, thank you. It is an honor to give me the opportunity to present this meaningful session. Hello, this is Young-hae Yoon, working at Dongdeok Women's University. I am teaching global MICE industry to students. Nice to meet you in person. The expression in person can only be used in person on site, but it seems to be used in online meetings now. Are you all taking good care of your health? I can't hear you. Okay, I'm mainly interested in MICE human resource development and destination marketing research. And recently, I am studying with an interest in sustainability. It is still an unfamiliar concept in the MICE field, but since overseas is already carrying out a strategy for this, I thought that I should research and develop it with interest. In particular, I was curious about how to overcome the current situation of the MICE industry, which is controversial with issues such as food waste, industrial waste, and air pollution from aviation. Okay, I want to go back the first page. Can you do that, Secretary? I'm sorry. Oh, okay, thank you. This picture is a common urban landscape, my city, but there is a difference between the left side and the right side colors. Ironically, there are reports that fine dust has decreased due to the COVID-19 outbreak, with fewer factories running, fewer airplanes, and cities stopped functioning for a while. We experienced a clear sky and air as shown on the right side in the picture. Although it is difficult to verify the exact relationship of influence, there is such a study. But sooner or later, the COVID-19 needs to be ended, and we will have to discuss environmental protection and sustainability in a hard-working world. Today, I would like to discuss the application of UN SDGs to the Korean MICE industry. It seems that you have fully recognized the concept, role, and necessity of UN SDGs through the previously announced speaker, Guy. However, how well can this concept be applied to the Korean MICE industry? We have questions about what to start with and what we can do and what approach we need to achieve this. So I personally conducted research on how to apply UN SDGs to the Korean MICE industry, and I will share the results with you now. Okay, next page. Globally, there will be uniqueness to each application of UN SDGs in each industry. The Korean mice industry also tends to be unique, and since it has just grown in Korea, its speed and direction will be slightly different from that of other countries or cities. In Korea, the mice industry has grown rapidly over the past 30 years, and convention centers are still being expanded in each region, and a convention center twice the size of the present will be completed by 2025, maybe. Honestly, it is true that there were not many in-depth thoughts and studies on sustainability or environmental protection. It is true that even now, quantitative growth is more important than qualitative growth. However, as a latecomer of the mice industry, if Korea grows in consideration of qualitative growth as well, greater growth and high degree of completion can be expected. In this situation, we conducted a study that reflected the current situation and specificity of mice in Korea. And hopefully the results will be meaningful, and we will begin the presentation. There are many mice cities in Korea, and I would like to explain 4 cases with sustainability strategies: Suwon, Busan, Daejeon, and Goyang. For the first time, Suwon has been certified as the city itself with the goal of sustainable development. The Sustainable City Tourism Destination Standard for the Republic of Korea is designed to apply the Global Sustainable Tourism Council criteria as universal principles into the context of cities in South Korea. The Suwon City Tourism Bureau plans to apply the standards first to their own internal sustainability practices, then seek other cities throughout the country to apply the standard as well. And next case is Busan. Okay. How can I next? Click. I'm sorry, I couldn't do that. Next page, please. Busan recently held a Sustainable Mice Campaign Idea Contest. Based on the Korea Sustainable Mice Standard study, the evaluation centered on 8 criteria to select companies and provide support. The 8 categories are there. The first one is staff management policy, communication, waste management, energy, air quality, water, procurement, and community partners. That 8 categories they have. And Busan plans to carry out strategic projects for sustainable Busan mice in the future. And the next is Daejeon. Daejeon is the second new city in Korea to join the GDS Index, as you know, Global Destination Sustainability Index. The city is now part of a global destination sustainability movement that engages, inspires, and enables it to become a place of regeneration. Okay, and then Goyang. As the last city, Goyang City is the mice city that actively tries to apply UN SDGs to the mice industry and put it into practice. Goyang has improved upon its performance compared to last year at the same rate as the GDS index average. If we look at the graph, the blue color is the average, and the orange color indicates the growth of Goyang City. And we can see that it grows steeply. Enterprise-wide, strategically, mice industries in Goyang City is trying to apply UN SDGs, and Pirelli is at the core. Personally, thank you very much. He is very powerful, leading sustainable mice, and it is a very difficult attempt because he continues to do so. Thank you again, Peter Lee and Goyang City. And next page. Okay, this is the result of my research. Comparing to the GDS index and personal status, distinct overlapping categories are found. Of the 17 items, 4 items completely overlapped and the importance was high. They are 4, 5, 8, and 12. And they are quality education, gender equality, decent work and economic growth, responsible consumption and production. In particular, in a study of peace and justice strong institutions, number 16, the importance and application importance of my study were very high. This is a very early study, and based on this study, we will continue to develop it. And then research was conducted through interviews with stakeholders of mice industry in Korea, mostly PCO, PEO, workers in related public institutions, bureaus, etc. Several results were derived from the study through interviews. 65% of people have heard of UN SDGs, and 35% have not heard of it. It's amazing. Yeah, and more than 60% of respondents answered positively to the question of whether the UN SDGs would be helpful in achieving the goal. And asked if UN SDGs would be helpful for national competitiveness in the mice field, more than 70% answered positively. So what kind of government support is needed for voluntary participation? It was tax benefits, education, and certifications, active government initiative, giving priority to government business operations. When asked whether to apply the UN SDGs to projects in the future, more than 75% answer positively. Yeah, that is very curious result. And then I did write these implications. I would like to discuss the implications through research. Korea is now beginning to recognize sustainability. As you know, there is still not much interest, but what is certain is that it'll be difficult to secure competitiveness as a mice destination unless we start right now, I think. And the first point is that the public relations and campaigns are needed because Korean mice stakeholders do not yet know the UN SDGs well. Local government and related associations should conduct programs such as periodic sustainability, education, and sharing of best practice models. The second point is that the government must quickly accept UN SDGs and reflect it in the policy with will and push forward. This factor is very important because Korea's mice industry is heavily influenced by government policies. The third point, after developing performances, indicators for sustainable mice development, companies that apply well to standards need to provide rewards. And next, the compulsory factor is also required. For example, reflecting UN SDGs compliance items as evaluation items when organizers select mice city. And next, the current issue of mice industry in Korea must be resolved. Examples of low salaries, welfare benefits, fair trade, etc., came from the interviews. And next, civic support and participation are needed. There are still many citizens who do not know the mice industry, and there are voices against growth. Without citizen support, it would be difficult to think of a sustainable mice. And next, the items that mice companies can implement right away are summarized. Online platforming and digitalization, setting business standards, use of recycled products, separate collection of waste, minimization of energy, resource waste, and food waste. If individual companies set regulations and put these issues into practice, sustainability will not be far away. And finally, I would like to suggest the step-by-step application. In the short term, this is necessary to address the mice issues and change the perception of policymakers and decision makers. In the midterm sector, both public and private industry and academia should come together and set a consensus goal. In the long run, we will be necessary to establish global partnership, develop performance indicators, and operate the funding system. Above all, it's important to get started with all these plans right away. It is no longer an unfamiliar concept. It should be incorporated into our lives, and sustainability and UN SDGs elements should be included in all MICE proposals. Okay. Despite the importance of sustainability, the reality that has not yet been mentioned in Korea is unfortunate. So I hope you understand that the overall feeling of the announcement was strong. The more difficult the situation is, the more we have to look into the future and plan our strategy. We look forward to the day when we realize and practice sustainability where we can coexist without thinking about the immediate losses. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, Professor Yoon. It's a wonderful research, and you also provide us so many agendas and homework too. So, to your first slide, COVID-19 make us have some more clean air and clean view, but if that is from the less business activity, that's too bad. But anyways, I'm also totally agree with the research result, especially in you emphasize on the government will to fertilize, facilitate, and UN SDGs achieve the UN SDGs. But and also I'm quite good impressed in more than 65%, and they already know about the UN SDGs. But you mentioned the 70% of respondents said that they has a will to cooperate to achieve the UN SDGs. But what they ask for the government is some kind of support for kind of the certification and then education. Actually, that's belong to their own company and their own public sector. So if they need it on that means still they need to explore more to get more will, and also they need more motivation to do this. So in terms of that, government's role is very important, and governments need to make a good practice for achieving UN SDGs. Anyways, it's a wonderful presentation. It's good, and let's get more and one more case study about the sustainability, and from the wonderful speakers. Last session is about where is it? Making Sydney a sustainable destination. The speakers is Pip Holly. She really, truly sustainable change maker. So she devoted more than 20 years for the sustainability. That right now she's a global destination sustainability movement, Asia Pacific change maker, and also right now is an NSW, Department of Planning, Industry and Environment, and as a sustainable consultant. Holly, Pip, thank you very much for your time and nice I expect a nice presentation. Please, Pip.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that great introduction. I'm just going to share my screen here. Bear with me for a second. Okay, so yeah, listen, I've come along today. As Peter so gratefully just introduced me there, I am currently working with Guy at the Global Destination Sustainability Movement. But prior to that, I was actually working for the municipality, the City Council in Sydney. And so I've come along today to talk through this, what approach Sydney took to try and transition their approach to a more sustainable version of destination management. Now, it's be fair to say that we haven't got to the regenerative point yet, but the mindset and the vision and the ideals behind what that model that Guy presented earlier is absolutely fundamental to the long-term change that Sydney's been trying to put in place for the last few years. So I thought I would just start by just providing a little bit of context for you about Sydney. So Sydney metropolitan area is a pretty large geographical area, home to about 5 million people. But the city of Sydney itself is like the major commercial area and home to essentially most of the visitors and the business economic activity that happens in that large metropolitan area, and absorbs about 1 million people every day from that surrounding region. So Sydney's essentially the gateway to Australia. When most visitors come to Australia, they come in through Sydney. It attracts about 14 million people a year, and is responsible for nearly 1/3 of Australia's international tourism earnings. So Sydney taking a stance on this and getting it right is really, really important to the bigger picture context of how sustainable Australia is as a destination. I guess I just wanted to also point out that this journey was something that the City of Sydney Council, which was who I was working for, we went into this in partnership with the major destination bureau in Sydney, Business Events Sydney. And it was really, really, really important point to note that partnership, because we both brought different elements, different expertise, different ability to have conversations with different stakeholders in terms of getting the message out there about the long-term direction that we wanted to go in with sustainability and the MICE industry and events in general. The context as well is that the political context, I guess, within which this was happening, which I think is important as well, is that Sydney is has been a leading environmental performer at the heart of its overall strategy. It's part of the C40 movement, which is a network of cities from around the world whose mayors have made public commitments to take action on climate change. So it has a net zero emissions commitment for not just its own operations, but for the city as a whole. And that target is to achieve that by 2040. In terms of its own current environment, you know, starts on renewable energy. All of its operations are powered 100% by renewable energy. That came into effect this year. So I guess what I'm just trying to do here is paint a picture that this strategy exists in really fertile ground for the conversation to take place. It doesn't mean that you know, all of the stakeholders that we were wanting to speak to were on the same part of the trajectory, but I think it really helped that both Business Events Sydney and the municipality were really strong about the fact that this was the way forward and this was the vision. So I guess one of the really other fundamental points here is that the basis for the strategy was evidence. So data was really, really, really important. This is the place where we started at. We used, you know, a company called Kinesis that have a model to help us bring together a whole bunch of big data from around the city, from total use from utilities, for instance, right down to smaller packets of data from individual buildings and from individual stakeholders. And we worked really hard with those people to package all of that data up to give us insights about where we would have the most impact if we took action. So that materiality assessment, that notion of really understanding where the biggest issues were, was fundamental to the development of the strategy. And the other reason we did it was to be able to set a baseline for when we started this work, so that we had a place to measure against and to be able to look back on and reflect how far we'd come, assuming our strategies and our interventions and our programs and so on were going to be successful. So that data was a really, really important starting point. And basically what it enabled us to do was to identify 3 sectors within the city that were really representing the biggest opportunities. And so, like most cities in the world, 85% of the emissions within that central area of Sydney come from buildings. And so when we looked at all the data, it became really apparent to us that one group of buildings out of the top 3, which were commercial office buildings, residential apartment buildings, and then this cohort that we refer to as the accommodation and entertainment sector, were responsible for 21% of emissions, 14% of potable water, and a huge proportion of the city's waste. And so this really grounded the issue that we were then trying to address and enabled us to develop strategies that went to the heart of what that was. We spent the best part of a year putting this strategy together, and we did it in collaboration with C40, the network that I mentioned previously. And it involved really deep and wide stakeholder engagement. There were sessions held over a number of months with all sorts of different stakeholders from the community, from businesses, from residents, from visitors, industry associations, all different range of stakeholders that were invited to speak to us and enable us to understand what the main barriers to action were, what the main opportunities were, and to start to come up with an idea of what some of the solutions might be. So basically, we came up with a plan for how we thought, after looking at the whole system that is what a sustainable destination might be, we came up with this strategy and this plan to focus in 5 key areas. So we realized that if we could really work with businesses and with the likes of Business Events Sydney when they're doing their pitches and their bids to overseas conferences, and a whole bunch of other people that are in the business of commissioning events and so on, if we could increase their voice, make their voice for wanting more sustainability to be in place, we had a really good chance of making this happen. But none of these things alone would make change happen. The really, really crucial part of our strategy is that all of these things are interrelated as part of a system. The increasing demand was a really important aspect. Building capacity and capability within the industry to be able to respond to those demands. Working with the industry to actually activate and make upgrades and changes within the industry happen. Putting a real focus on innovation and leadership and trying to look at the problem differently and supporting people to take risks, to try things was an important part of the strategy. And then lastly, telling the stories, making sure that we had a consistent narrative about this, that we were promoting the success stories and we were recognizing those leaders that were going out there and testing things. So just going to step through each of those elements and just provide you a little bit of an example about what we did in each of those areas. So under the increased demand, we, as I said, really the heart of our strategy was about making sure that we could get really good, high quality, high performing buildings within the event space. So we really went out and spoke to the industry about getting third-party accredited ratings that would look at their operations, look at the way they were offering events, the way they were using energy, the way they were dealing with waste, and independently certify them, which would in turn enable all of those organisations, businesses, whether international or local, to have a really tangible thing to be asking for. So rather than just saying we want a sustainable event, which can sometimes seem a bit nebulous, what this enabled us to do is say, focus on asking for these ratings. To ask whether your venue has one of these third-party credible ratings. Ask whether the organisation that is running the event or putting the event on has one of these accreditations. Because that way, there's no ambiguity about whether it's green or whether it's greenwashing. It's an objective fact. We spent a lot of time working in partnership with a bunch of people within the industry to create resources, to create training programs, to put on webinars, to hold events, to have workshops, to provide grants, to provide guides, to build the capability and the capacity and the understanding of everybody within the industry to know how to respond. Because we found that people are willing, people want to do this, people get it, they understand, but the how can sometimes be the stumbling block. So really working to get to the nub of each issue, putting a step-by-step guide together or a training program that we could then get people engaged around and to learn and to grow their understanding of what to do was really important. actually making the change happen, working out ways to facilitate funding, for instance, to partner people up, to put people in touch with the right consultants. Like brokering that change was a really big part of delivering on the strategy. This is an example of a solar array, an incredible solar array that happened at one of our main event buildings that happened as a result of this strategy. One of the key actions that we did under this fostering of leadership and innovation element was to form a collective impact group called the Sustainable Destination Partnership, which brought together 26 partners across the industry who all agreed in writing to work with us in the first instance over a 3-year period to improve the environmental performance of their operations. And that collaboration is so key to making this happen. No one player can make the change happen at the pace and scale that we need it to happen at. And so forming these collaborative partnerships along, you know, as spoken about in the sustainable destination goals, is really important part of creating the change. And this group of people were also the group that were prepared to test some of the ideas and to take some of the projects forward, knowing that they had the safety of some of their peers. So many of these organisations were in competition with one another, but they made this an issue that they were prepared to collaborate on. And they shared data transparently, they shared learnings transparently, and they shared you know-how and successes and in fact failures really transparently. And then the final part that I talked about was promoting and recognising. And for Sydney, the Sustainable Destination Index was a really key part of that. Getting that recognition on a global scale that what we were doing was making a difference, that was, you know, that was benchmarked and third-party accredited for our own performance was really important. We looked at ways of getting news stories out there in the media, of writing case studies, of applying for awards, of doing all sorts of things that really raised the profile to try and make this the norm. That was really the idea behind this part of the strategy, was this is not a niche idea on the edge of the mice industry. This needs to come mainstream and be really fundamental to how we're operating. And the only way to do that is to talk about it and to bring it to life. And I guess the last thing that I just wanted to say is that, you know, reporting and talking about our impact at a really, you know, a concrete way was important. So we worked really hard on our impact reporting about saying, here are the numbers, here's how the change is happening slowly, here's the percentage reduction in emissions, here's the percentage reduction in waste going to landfill. So we had that really hard data that each year we bring together and talk about with the industry to show that progress is happening and to inspire other people to come and join the movement. So that's a summary of how Sydney is progressing on this journey and what they've managed to achieve so far. Thank you.
Thank you, Pete. You know, to your presentation, Sydney is a really great, global MySyn city. So I'm quite surprised. The accommodation and entertainment industry is produced more than almost 50% commercial waste. But another quite interesting is you already convert the 50% to the recycle. And also, I'm very agree with you. You are some kind of a theory of changes. So what is it? Increase the demand. That means increasing demand causes action to do sustainability. That's a good thing. It's a wonderful presentation. I'm really appreciate with that. During your all speakers presentation, there is some questions in the chat box. Actually, speakers Guy and Professor Yun already answered some questions, but I want to remind the whole participants and that the questions and bring you a more detailed the answer for that. The first question from the Kaylee. Kaylee, I fully understand the sustainability movement is the best way of protecting ourselves. However, due to the financial burden, it's hard to make it executed. So this, the guy already the left a message or the answers on that. Why don't you guys get more? Give her more detailed answers.
Yeah, sure. It's the key question we face all the time, and you know, you have to look globally at the situation, right? So if you decide to switch all of your food from normal food to organic food, it's going to cost you 20-30% more, right? Okay, but it's not black or white, okay? And there's ways to do it. If you first of all, you shift from having a 60% predominated meat menu, and you switch and you reduce down to a vegetarian or a 30% meat, that will lower your price point. And then with what you save, then you can invest in organic food in some areas, and you can focus where it makes more sense. Some food is this is the health aspect as well. Like fruit is more damaged by pesticides and things like that, is more unhealthy for us as individuals. Slows us down during a meeting as well. Heavy amounts of pesticides stops our brain working. So things like that. Then you could say, right, paper. I want to do all my standard with recycled cardboard and paper, and that cost us 10% more. Well, design your stand so that you actually can reuse it, and so you're going to use it for twice, and yes, it's going to cost you 10% more, but you're going to reuse it twice. And that type of thinking, there's millions of cases of like that you can do. But the problem is a lot of our budgets are done per event, and we look per line. We don't look at the bottom. So we have to step back, and that's where you have to challenge your management systems to say, we need to look at this over a year or over an exercise, and say, look, yes, it cost us a bit more to start with, but over 3 events or 2 events, it's going to save us X. And so it's that kind of thinking that people get stuck on, and they still think it's black or white, where there's actually a lot of grey stuff in the middle, and you can get progressively better. You can have 20% organic food this time, or you can have 50% recycled content in your stand at the moment, and then next year you get a little bit better. And so it's very much like the work you've done, Peter, in the bureau. Every year you've got better, as we saw in that graph earlier, and that's the approach. It's not being perfect tomorrow.
Yeah, I totally agree. Also, I think sustainability is not matter of the expense and cost. Basically, it's about the changes, the shift change of thinking about the way what we've done so far. So to accomplish the sustainability, we need to change the way, and we need to change the thinking about what we're doing about the business events.
Yeah, and I think there's another thing also which people kind of forget, is that in an event, sometimes you produce an event that is simple. Okay. Sometimes it's big and fancy. We buy Kias or we buy Audis, right? You have clients that want the best, and for me, the best today is sustainable. Go to the best restaurants in the world today; they're sustainable restaurants, and so it is a sign of quality, which is an issue in itself. But remember, you might have clients who are prepared to break the rules and really go expensive just to show how committed they are. So there's an interesting kind of mixed messages there, but you have to challenge everything.
Okay. Next question is about, with the current situation, meeting technology and the virtualization have become crucial to sustain the MICE industry. Have you seen any success cases where these implementation have supported MICE destination to be more sustainable? I saw that some Professor Yoon already left us some answers on that. So Professor Yoon, can you get more detail?
Yes, but I will. Yeah, thank you very much for a good question. Yeah. And as I wrote in the chat window, building a virtual system is very important, but who makes a facility that works well and how quickly is also a key issue. And as technology evolves rapidly, it is also important to create the most up-to-date, optimized facilities. As mentioned, it is also recommended to excavate unique venue and make it a good facility. It is another perspective. It will also be very important to develop important industries in the region as events. As you know, MICE was the key to bringing in a large number of foreigners from the tourism perspective. But as questions about it are growing, but must be linked with the industry in the region. So meeting technology, we have to care about it. But another thing in this COVID-19 situation, we have to change and rethink very deeply. That's it.
Thank you, Professor Yoon. So that will be the last questions from, so Korean name is Eunjung, Kim Eunjung, Eunjung Kim. Question is, do you have any advice for the city officials that are planning to build a new convention center after the COVID-19? How about why don't you give some advice on the PIP? Your turn.
Yeah, sure. I just put some comments in the chat there, but look, essentially, I think, this is a great example of how you can use your voice to demand a really amazing outcome. So when we build a new building, we potentially lock in emissions for the next 50 or more years. So there's this huge responsibility anytime within any of our cities that we're building new buildings to make sure that they are designed, going back to Guy's point about designing out waste right from the very start is such an important element of sustainability, whether that be for a single event or for a building. You need to look at those material flows and understand what's going to be happening so that you can design that stuff out from the start. So I think having those principles put up front by the city officials, looking at your planning controls, working with green building councils within your city. That's what Sydney redesigned the major convention centre just a few years ago. And, it's got solar panels on it and it's got rainwater collection units. And the idea is that it can act as a real centerpiece for your city. But whatever it ends up being used for, if it performs well environmentally, then there's a lot of opportunity to promote that and to attract people. I mean, the convention centre here in Sydney does tours of its building, even when there's no event going on, just to show people the sustainability elements that have been built into it. So I think really, really, really taking to heart the responsibility that we have now to make sure that new buildings are built to the highest possible environmental standard is so important.
Okay.
That's a really important thing. I just want to add to that is that I think key to this convention centres is flexibility.
Yes.
And the ability to keep being able to change the space to adapt to issues, right? So, a lot of people are going to be working from home. A lot of offices are closing, especially in Europe at the moment, and they're not going to reopen. People are just going to work from home, which means there's going to be more need for people to come together. So how do you create more flexible spaces for people to come together? The whole boom in co-working spaces, I think maybe convention centres could look into that because many of those companies have gone bankrupt at the moment. So opportunities there, creating virtual studios, I think that's a massive opportunity. So being multi-purpose, so you can work as a cultural centre, educational facilities as well as business convention. So really thinking out of the box of everything that centre could do to be, as Pip just said, the centre of a community. and how it really gives back. So really thinking right now of community engagement, how you work with people to find out what they need. People like Sydney did a great job and the convention centre to work that out, but many centres are so disconnected from the community. And so, yeah, lots of exciting time. I mean, it's terrifying time, but all the good times are a bit edgy, aren't they? So I think there's some interesting stuff happening.
Okay. Also,
one more
sure. Go ahead.
Yes, how can we think far away when there is no business in front of us right now? So it is a serious situation. Significant changes in the mice industry are required due to this COVID-19. So the whole paradigm could change. So when implementing a new strategy and building a new center, you can take sustainability with you from the start. If the current structure persists as it is, neither the future of mice nor the future of all can be guaranteed, I think. So it may not be as okay, and that's all. And if you start, you can adjust this sustainability to the new building. So we can change a lot. So it's the time, I think. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Professor Yoon. I don't think there is the value change after the COVID-19 in the meeting industry, in the mice industry. So there is some change in the type and the format, but value of the meeting industry, so mice industry is never changed, I think. So, and also building a convention center is a cost a lot. So, and also that's why the government, local government's will is very important to affect. So in the what I suggest them is in sustainability side, in globally, so many convention center is right now is upgrading for sustainability. So I hope the new convention center do not repeat those mistakes. So when the beginning in the construction stage, if you implement even more cost in the really needed, but in the beginning construction stage, if you sustainable and options convention center have that will become the save the money and the more competitive in the future. Okay, I want to wrap up our session, but there is one more question, so there is no answer. So I kindly ask you the guys quick questions about this. Although we will know about becoming sustainable is necessary and will affect us in the future, like guys just said, such change could be expensive requirement commencement. What are some ways to promote and inspire the sustainable initiative? Guy. It's tough.
I think everyone knows we've got to do this. I don't think we need to convince people anymore. I think we need to enable people. So it's about creating the pathways to make this happen. So, I think each of us in our businesses has to think about what can we do to make it easier for our suppliers or our clients or our staff to take the right decisions. Because it's about making decisions and all the little ones that add up to the big impacts. So I think it's as simple and as complex as that. So it's really going through all of your areas of your business and looking at what are the impacts of your decisions. So that's why I think as Pete said, having the data makes a difference. So knowing, if you're flying to an event, what the carbon emissions are for that, right? If you're building a stand set, how much waste and resources are you using for that? And then once you've got that data, then thinking, well, how do we do it different? But not different just to have less impact, but different to be better. How do I make a better stand set? How do I travel better that people get more out of a meeting and are happier and are more satisfied? How do I design my event so it is better including all different types of people so we have more voices, more diversity, more discussion, more innovation? And for me, it's that focus on better You know, when you buy a Tesla car, you're buying a better car. You know, when you're buying the latest Nike trainers that are sustainable, you're buying better trainers than some of the other ones. You know, and this is what it's got to be about. It's got to be about better.
I guess I'd just like to add to that as well that, you know, the telling of the stories is a really, really powerful way of inspiring other people to think about what they might do, but also really fundamentally about what is possible. Sometimes people don't realize what is possible. And if you can find those stories that bring that to light and make it compelling and make it interesting, then you get people's attention and I think they get inspired. And if that's not, you know, if there's, you can look broadly for that, whether it's in another city, at another country, or even at another industry. I mean, I loved Guy's example of, you know, the Shinkansen looking at the kingfisher to look at nature. But, you know, I heard there's an amazing story that gets told often about, you know, the surgical operating team that looked at the Formula One mechanical team to really get inspired about how they could work together quickly in a high precision environment to do what they were doing better. And so I think there's lots of analogies out there that we can bring to this conversation that inspires people to look at what may be presented as a problem now and come up with innovative solutions.
Okay,
and there's a
lastly,
great...
can I add up more?
Yeah, go ahead, Professor.
Okay. Korean mice is very unique. So Korean mice industry is highly influenced by government policy. So this is because there is a tendency to depend on subsidies, I think. And if the government takes the initiative in reflecting and implementing policies, the industry will have no choice but to follow. You know, honestly, personally, I think that this should sound the alarm for sustainability and start practicing it from now on. Thank you.
Good point. And I just wanted to finish with a quote, which I love at the moment. And it comes from the Extinction Rebellion world, which is, you know, the big climate change world coming out of Europe. And it says, only the impossible is interesting. Right now, you know, the impossible, doing stuff motivates people. It gets us to work out. You know, dealing with COVID and organizing events is pretty impossible right now, but you've done it loads of times in Korea. That's interesting. So let's kind of, you know, let's innovate. Let's create new solutions to do stuff that today looks impossible because tomorrow it won't be.
Okay, thank you all. Thank you all. And also thank you for the participants to leave the questions.
Yeah,
I'm going to wrap up. Yeah, I'm going to wrap up this session. So, in the few years ago, I visited the MBS, Marina Bay Sands. That's a wonderful sustainable destination in the world. Now, I met someone and I asked why sustainability is a matter to you. That Scott Fisher said, they said because the clients want. Clients want. So clients' demand for the sustainability is increasing and will be a mandatory. And also, sustainability is not about the agenda. Sustainability is about action. So less conversation and more action. Actually, this is from a name of the blog as Guy's Runs. So thank you, Guy and Professor Yoon and Pip, and for your wonderful presentation, and also all participants. Thank you very much. See you next year. Thank you very much.
Thank you. See you next
See
year.
you next year face to face.
Okay, see you face to face. Good.
Face to
Thank
face.
you.
Thank you.